All right, so I'm going to make you guys unmute yourself and ask and chime in a minute here. So I'm going to give you 3 pitches from 3 companies, and the question is, what do they have in common? Okay, anti-solar, and the names are made up, but the pitches are real. So anti-solar has panels you put on the roof that provide passive cooling for your home or office, daytime or nighttime. So it's not solar as in heat, it's solar as in cooling. It really does exist. Manna takes your dinner scraps and it turns them into a nutritious, dried, delicious, shelf-stable snack bar, right? From your own food waste. Fusionary. So Fusionary is like Mr. Fusion from Back to the Future. So Fusionary is a safe and affordable fusion generator. It provides heat, hot water, and electricity inside your house. So what do they have in common?
It's impossible technology.
A bit. It's not totally impossible. We may have Mr. Fusion someday.
We don't understand how it works.
Okay. Well, what about anti-solar? Has anybody seen that in the news?
Oh, I don't want more cooling in Seattle.
Definitely not today. Yeah. So the commonality of these 3 is not necessarily that they're impossible, but that what I pitched to, the amount of information I pitched to, they're all still in research and development. They're all the kind of things that aren't ready. You know you can't go to Bed Bath & Beyond and buy the snack bar maker. That technology for anti-solar just came out of Stanford, and they're in the midst of commercializing it. And there are literally a whole bunch of fusion companies right now that are being funded. But the difference is that they're all asking for money before the product is ready. And what we have to ask as investors when we see one of these deals is it real? So going back to that fuelless generator, yeah, there was a prototype. I never got to touch it or feel it because he was in another country, but I got to see a lot of videos. I got to see real-time over Skype videos with it. But what I kept asking him, and he just never could answer, is like, well, okay, what do we need in order to make that a product? What do we need to turn that prototype into an actual commercial product? It's much harder than everybody thinks to do that. Like the last 10% of the fit and finish and research to get the engineering ready for a commercial product often takes years and lots of money. And then the question is, how much money? Is this a $100,000 effort to get something to a factory in China, or is $1 million of tooling? Or in the case of the fusion, are we talking about years and years and years of more research? And then the one that never gets asked by the journalists, at least, you read the stories. Nobody asks, well, what would the cost be of this unit from what we know now? Just take the parts that you're putting together in the prototype. What would that cost? Would that be a reasonable product or not? If the fusion generator for your home worked great, but it was $1 million, they're not going to sell very many for home. And so for each of these, that's kind of the issues here. Plus, there is some of the science, right? So if you're not a scientist and you don't understand the physics, you should probably pass. But in the anti-solar one of the things that caught my eye was theoretically the best it could possibly do was like 10 degrees. So you could send some cooling water, if you're trying to cool Arizona, you could send some 90-degree heat up to the roof and you'll get 80-degree heat back into the building. That's not good enough. Even if it was free, that's not good enough. That's not going to cool the building. So there's something missing there. And I did cheat on the Manna one. I just love that idea. I made it up. It doesn't exist. I don't think it's possible at all. But who knows? Maybe you could dry out your dinner and make something edible out of it. Okay, so let's try this 3 more times. So 3 more pitches. Community source capital. So they make small 0% interest loans to local companies, and they got the money from the happy customers of those businesses. Juabar deploys solar-powered kiosks in Tanzania, and 67%, almost every adult has a cell phone, but the electric grid only covers 2% of the populace. So the idea was bring power out to the villages in solar form, in kiosks, in a franchise model. And the last one's Personify. And the longer version of this, I didn't want to type it all in, is Americans donate a huge amount of money to charity. It's something on the order of like 80% of all Americans do some donations to charity, but only 10% donate their time as volunteers. And so the idea was to make an app as easy to use as Google Maps, so you could find some place to donate your time, making it as easy to donate your time as money. Any guesses on what these 3 have in common?
On the first and third one, I don't really understand how they're going to make their money.
Okay. Always a good question to ask. Let's just assume that they have a method that sounds reasonable. Anybody else have a guess?
Yeah, all these seem to be two-sided markets. So you need to be able to balance both and get some traction on both sides.
So somebody has a little experience. That's a good point. I didn't think of that when I typed these in, but that's true in Juabar's case only because of the franchise model. Otherwise, it would be a single-sided market.
Margins are too tight.
Okay. Hey, Seaton. Nice to see you here. Seaton, you should recognize two of these. The answer is these are all fledglings, but that's not what I'm going for. The actual answer is they all failed. So I tried really hard to pitch them in present tense instead of past tense. They all failed. They're all fledglings. They all didn't work. They all didn't work for different reasons. And the point I'm trying to make here is that most startups fail. The reason why angels and VCs pass on almost every startup is most of those startups are going to fail. Half of them aren't going to make it for 3, 4, 5 years. And of the ones that get backed by the venture capitalists, 85% of them are going to fail. They're going to run out of money and go out of business. And we can't tell right now of any of the 602 that are applying to Pledge right now. I can't tell you which ones are going to be around. I can't tell you which ones are going to fail. I can't tell you which ones are going to succeed. No one can do that. When the professional venture capitalists who get the best deals in the world can't get it right more than 15% of the time, you know this is hard. So what we want to look at and try to understand and teach you guys is what are the common ways to fail so that you can look at those patterns and try and see if the next company matches one of those patterns. And that becomes easy and easier as you see more and more deals. So in the case of community source capital, the problem was really interesting. We worried I worked with this company for in the school where I taught and then at Pledge, so 2 years. We worried so much about whether or not anyone would lend money at 0% interest. And we didn't really worry that companies would want to take a loan at 0% interest. And there was a fee in there, so it wasn't free, but it was 0% interest loan. And what happened was, what we discovered was that it was really hard to get those companies to sign up for a 0% interest loan. They would rather go to Square and get money at like 20% because that was easy. They could do a few clicks, they could have some money, and it cost them 3-4 times what our loans cost, but it was easy and our loans were complicated. And so the cost to us, I use us a lot, the cost to us at Community Source Capital to find the next customer to get a loan was more than we earned from each loan. And so we ran out of money. At Juabar, we didn't see this coming. The battery controller that controlled the solar going into the battery, it failed in all the units. It turned out that the one we picked that should have worked didn't work, and we had to go out and replace them all. That ate up all our capital. And again, if you remember that slide showing the noisy financial flow, well, if you get a quarter and you have to like lose all your money for a quarter, it doesn't really make investors want to say yes when they come and see those numbers. So it just made raising capital to grow that company next to impossible, ran out of money, shut it down. In the case of Personify, very odd case here. He just didn't launch the product. Like we worked with him and it looked like the product was imminently about to launch, and then it didn't. And then it didn't, and then it didn't. And then, life got in the way and there were some personal issues. And then 3 years later, I get an email from him saying, I finally launched it. But 3 years later, he didn't have any personal runway. He didn't have any savings left to actually turn into a business. And by then it's, I showed you a stale 3-year-old company with no revenues and no product. Nobody wants to fund that. And so that was the end of that business. It's a good idea. Somebody else should do it, but he can't do it.